It seems like every day we hear about language models doing more and more incredible things, almost like they're starting to actually reason like humans.
Yeah.
What's really going on there? Well, today we're taking a deep dive into Phi-4, a new model from Microsoft Research.
Okay.
And this one is really turning heads, not just because of its size, but because of how it was trained.
Yeah, you're right to point that out. I mean, it kind of goes against the grain, right? The whole bigger is better trend with these huge models.
Right.
But Phi-4 really focuses on the quality of the data it's trained on, not just how much data it can gobble up. And the results are pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at tasks that require complex reasoning.
So Phi-4, it's a 14 billion parameter model, not tiny by any means.
Right.
But compared to some of the giants out there, I mean, it's dwarfed.
Yeah.
How is it performing so well without being one of those massive models?
It's really a different way of thinking about the problem.
Yeah.
The team behind Phi-4 realized that just scaling up, making the model bigger and throwing more data at it, it just doesn't work forever. Eventually you hit a wall. So they went for something I really like. They call it data craftsmanship. Basically, they were incredibly careful about how they selected and refined the training data.
Data craftsmanship, I like that.
It makes you think about those artisans that spend years honing their craft, focusing on the tiniest details.
Right, absolutely. But I've got to ask about this term that keeps popping up, synthetic data.
Yeah.
What is that in the world of language models? And why is it so crucial for Phi-4?
So synthetic data, basically, it's information that's created artificially, so not gathered from the real world. But that doesn't mean it's just random stuff.
Okay.
There's a real art to designing this synthetic data. You're trying to create data that specifically targets how the model learns.
So it's like you're creating a virtual training ground for the model with all these custom-made challenges and exercises.
Exactly. A custom curriculum, but for a language model. And they use some really interesting techniques to do this.
Give me the highlights. What really stood out to you?
Okay, well, one that caught my eye was this idea of seed curation.
Yeah.
So imagine you take the best, most informative content from the web, code repositories, all these great sources, that's your seed. And then you transform that seed into exercises, discussions, problems that really make the model think.
So you're basically setting up these intellectual hurdles for the model to jump over, make it really work those reasoning muscles.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it doesn't stop there. They also use a technique called rewrite and augment. So they take that seed data and they make it more complex, more nuanced, but without losing the core information, kind of like taking a basic concept and turning it into this multifaceted problem.
Right. Okay, so I'm starting to see how powerful this synthetic data can be. But there's one technique I just got to ask about, self-revision.
Oh, yeah.
That sounds so human. How does a language model even revise its own work?
It's pretty amazing. They trained Phi-4 to evaluate its own responses, to see where it could do better, and then actually revise them based on principles of good reasoning, factual accuracy. It's like having this AI editor that's constantly refining its own work.
That's incredible. So if synthetic data is this powerful, why bother with real-world data at all?
That's a really good question. And the reports do mention that they still curated and filtered what they call organic data, stuff created by humans.
Right.
So why do that? Well, here's the thing. Synthetic data was great for reasoning, no question. But the team noticed something kind of strange. Models trained only on synthetic data, they tended to hallucinate more. Like they would just make up facts.
So even with this carefully crafted synthetic data, you still need a bit of reality to keep things grounded.
Exactly. And they found that using human-generated question and answer data, that was really helpful in anchoring the model's knowledge to the real world.
Okay, so get ready for this one. This is where things get really cool. The report talks about pivotal token search, or PTS. And I got to say, my mind was blown when I read about this. Can you explain it to us regular folks?
Sure. Imagine you're watching a language model, step by step, as it's solving a problem. At each step, there's a certain probability of it getting to the right answer. PTS is all about identifying these crucial decision points, those moments where one choice can make or break the whole solution.
So it's not just about feeding the model right and wrong answers. It's about teaching it to make better decisions.
Exactly. To recognize those key moments where everything hinges on a single choice.
Wow. And by pinpointing those pivotal tokens, the team was able to create preference data to guide Phi-4's learning, especially for math and coding problems.
Right. And it really seemed to help make the model more robust.
So we've been focusing on this pre-training phase. But even a model as well prepared as Phi-4, it still needs some polishing to be a safe, helpful AI, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What happens in that post-training phase?
Yeah, that's where things get fine-tuned. So with Phi-4, they did fine-tuning on a massive amount of conversational data, like 8 billion tokens, to make it more natural, like you're chatting with it.
So less like a cold calculating machine, more like something you could actually have a conversation with.
Exactly.
But there's more to it than that, right?
You're right.
I keep seeing this direct preference optimization, or DPO. What is that exactly, and how did they use it with Phi-4?
DPO, it's like fine-tuning, but with a human touch. You're trying to align the model's outputs with what we, as humans, consider to be good or desirable.
Right.
And they actually use DPO twice with Phi-4.
Twice. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So the first round built upon that pivotal token search we were talking about, those critical decision points. They use that data to train Phi-4 to make the kinds of choices that humans would prefer.
So they're guiding the model towards more human-like decision-making, even in these very subtle moments.
Yeah, exactly. And the second round of DPO, this one's called judge-guided DPO. And it's fascinating. They took hundreds of thousands of pairs of responses, some desired, some not.
Okay, so desired versus undesired. But who decides which is which? Who's the judge in this AI court?
Well, they actually brought in the big guns for this GPT-4. They used GPT-4 to act as the judge to evaluate those response pairs based on, like, accuracy, style, level of detail, like having an AI expert giving feedback.
AI teaching AI. Wow, that's incredible. But we've been talking about making Phi-4 smarter, more capable. What about safety? How do you make sure a model this powerful doesn't go off the rails? How do you make sure it's a responsible AI?
That's the most important question, really. And the team took a really multifaceted approach to this. And one part that I thought was really interesting involved those hallucinations we were talking about earlier.
Right, where the model makes stuff up and it doesn't know the answer.
Right. So instead of trying to eliminate hallucinations during the pre-training, they actually later trained Phi-4 to recognize when it was likely to hallucinate. And instead of making something up, just refuse to answer.
Interesting. So it's like teaching the model to say, I don't know, rather than going into potentially harmful territory.
Yeah, exactly. But what about those times when it does answer? How do you make sure those answers are responsible and reliable?
Right.
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. And that's where we get into the heart of how the Phi-4 team thought about responsible AI. So one of the key things they did was this thing called red teaming. They actually brought it in a separate team.
Yeah.
It's called the Microsoft AI Red Team. And their whole job is to try and find vulnerabilities in AI models.
So they've got this dedicated team of AI ethical hackers, you could say, whose only purpose is to try and break the model.
Yeah, basically, they poke and prod, they look for weaknesses, biases, anything that could be harmful. They're playing the role of the adversary.
It's like putting Phi-4 through an ethical obstacle course.
Yeah.
Make sure it can resist temptation.
Exactly. And it's not a one-time thing. It's this ongoing process, always testing, refining, improving the safeguards as the model evolves.
That's good to hear. They're taking it seriously. But let's talk about how you actually measure a model's performance. They put Phi-4 through all those standardized benchmarks we hear about, right? How to do.
Yeah, Phi-4 definitely punches above its weight, I'd say. It scored really well on a whole range of standardized benchmarks, especially in the areas we've been talking about, math, coding, STEM stuff.
So it's a bit of a brainiac, even compared to these much bigger models.
You could say that. But it's important to understand that those standardized benchmarks, they've got limitations. They might be contaminated with data the model's already seen.
So it's like giving a student a test where they've already seen the questions. Doesn't really measure their understanding.
Exactly. And that's a big concern in the field right now, making sure we're truly measuring a model's abilities.
Right. So how do you get around that? How did the Phi-4 team make sure they were getting an accurate assessment?
Well, they were really careful about this contamination issue. They cleaned their training data, removing anything that overlapped with the benchmarks. And they focused on benchmarks that are known for being original, like this one called GPQA, which uses really tough STEM questions, graduate level stuff.
So choosing the right tests, the ones that really force the model to think critically?
Right. But they didn't stop there. They went a step further and developed their own internal benchmark called Phi-bench.
Okay, so their own testing ground. A custom obstacle course for Phi-4. What's special about Phi-bench?
Well, Phi-bench was built on three main ideas: originality, diversity, and rigorous scoring.
Okay.
So originality first. All the questions in Phi-bench were created by the team. So Phi-4 had never seen them before, no chance of cheating.
Like a pop quiz for a language model?
Exactly. Second was diversity. Phi-bench wasn't just about math and coding. It covered all sorts of tasks: reasoning, logic puzzles, even creative writing. They wanted to see how well Phi-4 could generalize across different areas.
A mental decathlon for language models. I love it.
And the third was rigorous scoring. For tasks that involved writing, they didn't just look at simple things like word count. They developed these really detailed rubrics to judge the quality of the reasoning, clarity of the writing, the overall coherence.
So they're looking for more than just the right answer. They want to see evidence of deep thinking.
Absolutely. And Phi-4 really did shine on Phi-bench. It consistently showed that it could handle these complex reasoning problems, even outperforming much bigger models.
That's impressive. But I got to imagine that even with all this innovation, there were still areas where Phi-4 struggled. What were some of the weaknesses they found?
You're right, no model's perfect, and Phi-4 does have limitations. One area where it still needs work is its knowledge base. Compared to those giant models with trillions of parameters, it just doesn't have as much information.
So even with all the effort to ground it in real-world data, there are still gaps.
Yeah, seems like size does still matter when it comes to just storing massive amounts of facts. It's like having a bigger library.
Right, makes sense. Any other weaknesses?
They also found that while Phi-4 can follow instructions, it's not as good at super specific, complicated instructions, especially ones with really strict formatting rules.
So it's more of a free spirit.
Yeah, kind of. It excels at things that require understanding, reasoning, but it might struggle if you need it to strictly follow a set of procedures.
Interesting. It's like those strengths and weaknesses go hand in hand.
It is. And another thing they noticed, Phi-4 sometimes gives overly elaborate answers, even for simple questions.
So it likes to show off its reasoning skills a little, even when a simple answer would do.
Yeah, you could say that. And while Phi-4 can work in a chat format, they noted that it's really designed for single-turn queries. It's not as good at back-and-forth conversations yet.
So more of a solo artist than a collaborative partner, at least for now.
Good analogy. But even with these limitations, Phi-4 is a big step forward. It challenges what we thought was possible with these smaller models, and it raises some really interesting questions about where things are going.
It's like they've discovered a new element, a new way of thinking about AI, and we're just starting to explore what we can do with it.
I like that. And with that exploration, of course, comes responsibility, making sure these powerful tools are used responsibly.
Right, absolutely. We talked about some of the safety measures, but I'd love to dig a little deeper. What were some of the key principles that guided their approach to responsible AI?
Well, one of the most important was transparency. They wanted to be open about their methods, their data, their findings, so everyone could understand how Phi-4 was developed and tested.
No black boxes here. They want people to see how it works.
Exactly. Transparency is crucial for trust. And another key principle was fairness, making sure Phi-4 treated everyone fairly, regardless of their background, their beliefs, anything like that.
That's so important, especially as AI becomes more and more part of our lives. But how do you make sure something as complex as a language model is fair?
That's a tough question. But the Phi-4 team took a multi-pronged approach. One thing was carefully choosing their training data to remove any sources of bias.
So like making sure it's exposed to a wide range of viewpoints.
Exactly, but data is just part of it. They also used a bunch of techniques during training and fine-tuning to try and reduce bias. One technique is called adversarial training. Basically, they try to trick the model into being biased and then adjust the training to make it more resistant.
So giving it these ethical challenges to help it learn to avoid bias.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And they also use things like fairness constraints, which are rules they impose during training. Like they might require the model's predictions to be equally accurate for different demographic groups.
It's like setting up guardrails to keep it on the right track ethically. But with all these safeguards, how does Phi-4 actually perform in the real world? I mean, we've talked about benchmarks, but how does it handle real human language? The messy stuff.
That's the real test. And it's still early, but the results are promising. It's showing this remarkable ability to adapt, to learn from mistakes, to have these really sophisticated conversations.
Sounds like we're just at the beginning of what Phi-4 and models like it can do.
Exactly. And that brings us to maybe the most interesting question. What does Phi-4 tell us about the future of AI?
That's a big one. What are your thoughts? Where are we headed with language models?
Well, Phi-4 really challenges our assumptions. It shows what you can achieve even with a relatively small model. It highlights the importance of data quality and these creative training techniques. But maybe most importantly, it makes us think about what it really means for a machine to think. And that's a whole other conversation. But I'll leave you with this.
A cliffhanger. All right, lay it on me.
If a model like Phi-4 can do this much without being huge, where will we be in a few years? What happens when these techniques are applied to models with hundreds of billions, even trillions of parameters? It's exciting and a little scary, honestly.
It's like we're standing on the edge of a new frontier. So much potential.
And as we go forward, we have to be careful, thoughtful, ask ourselves not just what AI can do, but what it should do.
Well said. This has been an amazing deep dive into Phi-4, but we've only just scratched the surface.
There's always more to learn. I encourage you to check out the show notes. We've got links to all the papers and stuff we talked about.
And the world of AI is changing so fast, it's important to stay curious, stay informed.
Absolutely.
That's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us on this exploration, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of ideas and innovation.
Imagine like a world where everyone can understand each other, no matter what language they speak.
Yeah.
Ideas flowing freely between cultures across continents. That's the dream behind these multilingual language models.
It's a powerful idea. A world without language barriers. We could learn from each other so much more easily, collaborate. But we've seen with Phi-4, even the smartest models, they still have limitations.
What are some of the challenges you run into when you're building a model that has to understand and generate text in multiple languages?
Data, for one. English has tons of digital text out there, perfect for training language models. But a lot of other languages, they just don't have as much. It's like trying to build a house with only a few bricks.
So how do you work around that? How did the Phi-4 team handle this? Training a model on multiple languages when some of them just don't have as much data.
They had to get creative. They used existing multilingual data sets, worked with researchers in other countries. They even developed techniques for like automatically generating training data in languages where there just wasn't enough.
So they had to go digging for those linguistic gems.
Yeah, exactly. And it worked. Phi-4 can understand and generate text in a bunch of different languages. You can even translate between them pretty accurately. That's amazing. It's like they've built a bridge between languages. But can a machine really get all the nuances of human language? Across different cultures, I mean.
That's the million-dollar question. Language is more than just words and grammar.
Right.
It's tied to culture, history, all these lived experiences.
So it's not just translating the words, it's translating the meaning, the intent, the emotions behind them.
Right. And that takes a level of cultural understanding that, honestly, machines are still not that great at.
It's like when you use one of those online translators. Sometimes you get a result that's technically correct, but it just doesn't feel quite right.
Yeah, exactly. It's missing that deeper cultural context. That's what makes human language so rich and complex.
So where do we go from here? How do you build language models that don't just speak multiple languages, but really understand the cultures behind them?
That's a huge challenge. It's going to take a lot of different perspectives: linguistics, computer science, anthropology, maybe even philosophy. We can't just keep feeding these models more and more data. We have to find ways to give them a deeper understanding of human culture and all the complexities of language.
And so we have to teach them not just to speak, but to think, to feel.
Yeah, exactly. And we're just at the beginning of that journey. We're on the verge of this new era in communication where language barriers might not even exist. But we have to be careful, responsible. We have to remember that AI needs to be human-centered.
Well said. This has been an incredible deep dive into Phi-4 and the future of language models. We've covered so much: synthetic data, multilingual communication, the ethical side of AI.
It's been great. I hope it's made everyone want to learn even more.
Me too. And if you do want to dig deeper, check out the show notes. We've got links to all the research we've talked about.
And remember, AI is changing all the time. So stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged in the conversation.
That's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of ideas and innovation.